All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are digging into a huge question. Why do we do the things we do? We're going to be using a fantastic lecture from Stanford University as our roadmap, and it's a journey that's probably going to challenge how you think about, well, pretty much everything.
Okay, so to kick things off, the lecture presents us with this mystery, this little story. It seems simple on the surface, but trust me, it's going to unpack the whole messy business of human behavior.
So picture this guy. He's got a pretty normal, stable life, right? Married 15 years, couple of kids, steady job. And then, one day, it all just implodes. Out of the blue, he walks up and punches a coworker. A few months later, his wife finds out he's having an affair. And for the grand finale, he embezzles all the money from his company and just disappears. His whole life completely off the rails.
So what's the deal here? Is this guy just a total creep? Is he having some kind of epic midlife crisis? Well, the lecturer hits us with a bombshell. The real answer is that third option. It turns out this exact pattern of behavior can be caused by a specific neurological disease, and it all comes down to a single mutated gene. Right away, this just shatters our simple explanations for why people do things. See, to deal with how complicated the world is, our brains use this really powerful but also really flawed shortcut. We think in categories. We love putting things, and especially people, into nice, neat boxes. It helps us process stuff fast, but oh boy, does it come with a price. And this slide here, it's a perfect way to see what's happening. In reality, the world is a spectrum, like a rainbow with all its infinite shades of color. But our brain? Nah, it doesn't see that. It just chops up that smooth, continuous gradient into these big, clunky boxes. Red, orange, yellow. And we lose all the beautiful, messy detail in between. And this habit of boxing everything up, it messes with our heads in three big ways. First, we start assuming everything inside a box is basically the same. Second, we totally overestimate how different two boxes are, even if they're right next to each other. And third, because we're so focused on the lines between the boxes, we completely miss the big picture.
The lecturer tells this amazing and frankly kind of terrifying story about this. So he needed to learn a new medical procedure, and he calls up this urologist in Finland for some advice. After they go over the steps, the Finnish doctor says, "Okay, now you just need to practice. I want you to practice on a bear."
A bear? You can imagine he was pretty confused. But the doctor's just like, yep, standard practice for our residents. So finally, it clicks. Turns out, the Finnish language doesn't really distinguish between the B and P sounds. So, to the doctor's brain, bear and pear were in the exact same sound box. It's a hilarious but also perfect example of how our brains can literally be blind or deaf to differences that fall inside one of our mental categories.
So, this whole getting stuck in a box thing, it's not just a funny anecdote about bears and pears. When we apply this kind of thinking to human behavior, the consequences can be, well, they can be devastating. Let's look at some examples.
All right, first up, John Watson. He was a huge figure in psychology, a founder of what's called behaviorism. And this guy was absolutely convinced he could explain everything about a person just by looking at their environment, rewards and punishments. He was totally pathologically stuck in this one bucket. To him, stuff like biology, genetics, hormones, totally irrelevant. It was all nurture all the time. End of story. And this wasn't just some abstract theory in a textbook. This kind of one-dimensional thinking had massive, real-world consequences. It shaped how entire generations of kids were raised and taught, all based on a picture of human beings that was, missing half the pieces. Okay, here's another one. A neurologist named Egis Moniz. He was sure he could cure mental illness with something he called synaptic adjustments. And his confidence? It was off the charts. He actually claimed his procedure led to cures and improvements, but, get this, no failures. So what was this miraculous adjustment? The frontal lobotomy. Yeah, he was so trapped in his purely neurological bucket, so convinced that slicing into the brain was the one and only answer, that he proudly accepted a Nobel Prize for it. And the result? His singular focus, his one-bucket thinking, led to one of the absolute darkest, most tragic chapters in the history of medicine. Countless lives were just destroyed by a procedure born from this incredibly narrow point of view. And now we get to the most extreme, the most horrifying example of them all, Konrad Lorenz. Now this guy was no slouch. He was a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, one of the founders of ethology, famous for his work with animals.
But he took his scientific, categorical thinking and he applied it to genetics and to race. He didn't just have some questionable ideas, he became a full-blown, rabid Nazi propagandist. He took all the authority and the language of science and used it to argue for the extermination of people he decided were genetically inferior.
This is it. This is the ultimate terrifying danger of getting trapped in one terrible idea. His scientific bucket was twisted to create a rational-sounding justification for the Holocaust. And we're not talking about some fringe lunatics here. These were some of the most influential thinkers of their time, and their love of simple categories led directly to catastrophe.
Okay, so if thinking in these neat little boxes, these buckets, is so incredibly dangerous, what's the alternative? Well, the lecture argues we have to completely change the question. We have to stop asking what's the one cause and start looking at all the influences across all of time.
To really get a handle on any behavior, you got to peel it back like an onion, layer by layer. What were your neurons doing a split second before you acted? What hormones were sloshing around in your system a few hours before? How did your childhood, your entire life shape you? What kind of culture did your ancestors create centuries ago? And you can go all the way back millennia to the evolutionary pressures that literally built our species. There's never just one answer.
And the lecture gives us this beautiful way to think about it. A clock, right? You can understand a clock by taking it apart and putting it back together. But behavior is not a clock. It's a cloud. You can't understand a cloud by taking it apart. It's this dynamic, ever-changing system that's a product of everything that came before it. And that's exactly what we are.
And look, this isn't just some cool academic idea to think about. This whole framework, this idea of looking beyond the simple buckets, it has huge, immediate implications for how we actually live our lives, day to day.
Because the lecture makes this point crystal clear. We are all behavioral biologists every single day. Every time we serve on a jury and literally decide someone's fate. Every time we vote for a policy that affects millions of people. Heck, every time we just try to understand why a loved one is hurting. We are constantly making these high-stakes judgments about people. And being thoughtful, informed ones, it really, really matters.
So, we're going to leave you with one final big, provocative question to chew on. If every single thing we do is the end result of this unbelievably complex web of causes stretching back through our entire lives, our culture, our evolution, then how much real control do we have? In the end, what does that actually mean for free will?